Hello, Finger Lakes. We're excited to have all of you joining
This
our
meeting
cannabis
is being recorded.
conversation this evening. I'm Erin Hammond, Director of External Affairs for the Office of Cannabis Management. Tonight, you're going to hear first from our Executive Director, Chris Alexander, who's joining us via a brief video to say hello. Following Chris, Cannabis Control Board Chair Tremaine Wright will go through a presentation outlining the legalization law and how it's designed to keep New Yorkers safe and healthy and build an equitable and inclusive new cannabis industry. But you aren't just joining to hear from us. This is a conversation, and we want to hear from you too. So after Tremaine finishes her presentation, we're going to be fielding questions. Some of you may have already submitted questions via Eventbrite when you registered. We have those. We also have a team of people monitoring the inbox for Cannabis Conversations at ocm.ny.gov. And they'll be flagging your questions for Tremaine in real time. If we don't get to your question tonight, someone from our office will follow up as soon as possible. So first up is our video welcome from Office of Cannabis Management Executive Director, Chris Alexander. Chris is a criminal justice reformer and advocate who has spent his career successfully fighting to overturn the laws that made marijuana illegal and to support the communities most harmed by disproportionate enforcement of its prohibition. We'll get into that more later if that sounds a little confusing. For now, let's hear from Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Alexander, Executive Director of the New York State Office of Cannabis Management, the new office that's charged with regulating cannabis in New York State. I'd like to welcome all of you joining us for today's Cannabis Conversation. We're having these conversations across the state to help inform New Yorkers about the law that legalized cannabis for those 21 years old and over. It's called the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, or the MRTA. And our Cannabis Control Board Chair, Tremaine Wright, will be walking you through it. And then we'll take some questions. We're especially excited to speak with you about how the MRTA is designed to reduce criminalization while also promoting public health, and how it puts equity, inclusion, and justice at the forefront of the new cannabis industry we are building. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to continuing this conversation with communities around the state. Let's get started.
That was great. Thank you, Chris. I'll now turn things over to Cannabis Control Board Chair Tremaine Wright. Tremaine is a former member of the New York State Assembly, attorney, and small business owner with deep roots in the Brooklyn community she's worked so hard to preserve and strengthen. She's fought tirelessly to empower and create opportunities for her neighbors and community. Tremaine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Erin and Chris, for those wonderful introductions. It's truly a pleasure to be here with all of you this evening. However, before we dive in, it's really important for me to state that we are earnestly working to build this new cannabis industry. While there's a lot to accomplish, we're focused on the regulations that will establish the new structure for the cannabis industry. These regulations will ensure that the cannabis industry is safe, that it protects public health of New Yorkers, and it provides an equitable opportunity. So let's start with the most basic question. What is cannabis? Well, the scientific name is cannabis sativa. I'm sure you've heard it called by many other names too, like weed, pot, or marijuana. However, we're not using the term marijuana here because it's for too long been associated and used to racially profile. So let's focus on this plant, cannabis sativa. It's a versatile plant. It's been used by people for thousands of years for medicinal, industrial, and food purposes. Cannabis is full of naturally occurring chemical compounds that interact with our body's endocannabinoid system and produce different effects on the mind and body. The most common and well-known compound in cannabis is called THC. It causes the euphoric feeling, the high that most people associate with cannabis. It also has medicinal properties, which are relied on to treat a growing number of ailments and conditions. The other commonly known compound in cannabis is CBD. Most commonly, we hear its use and we are familiar with its use in health and wellness products. You may also have heard of hemp and wondering where does that fit in? Well, it too is part of it is the cannabis plant, not part of, but it is a cannabis plant. And it's just a plant that produces 0.3% or less of THC. Because of that small amount of THC, hemp is not a federally controlled substance, which means it's not federally prohibited to grow, sell, or consume it. So let's shift gears to the MRTA. Last year, on March 31st, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act was signed into law. Going forward, I'm just going to refer to it as the MRTA. This law legalized adult use cannabis in New York State and created the Office of Cannabis Management, OCM, which is overseen by a 5-member Cannabis Control Board, and that's where I fit in as chair of the board. Under the law, the medical cannabis and cannabinoid hemp programs were expanded and placed under OCM, along with our adult use cannabis program. With legalization, New York shifted from cannabis policy that was centered on law enforcement and persecution to a policy that's centered on public health. New York State's cannabis policy is now grounded in the principles of keeping New Yorkers safe and healthy, as well as economic and social justice. The MRTA and how OCM is implementing it focuses on addressing the harms done to people and communities when cannabis was illegal. We're committed to addressing the impact of over-policing and mass incarceration based on previous laws that banned the possession and use of cannabis. The MRTA generates revenue from the sale of cannabis that will be dedicated to supporting specific programs that reinvest in people and communities that have been harmed. But how do we determine that amount? Under the MRTA, an excise tax will be paid when cannabis products are sold from wholesalers to retailers. This tax is based on the level of THC in the cannabis product. While the excise tax will vary by product type, overall, the higher the content, the higher the tax rate. This is similar to the excise tax we already use in the alcohol industry, where the higher the alcohol content, the higher the tax paid on the product. Then there's the sales tax that's applied when a retailer sells cannabis to the customer. These taxes are used to cover the cost of the OCM's operations, law enforcement training, and programs to support equity applicants. After those costs, 40% of the remaining tax revenue goes to supporting schools across New York State, and 40% will be reinvested in communities that were most harmed by the disproportionate policing when cannabis was illegal. And finally, the last 20% will support drug treatment programs and public education programs. The MRTA gave cities, towns, and villages control over whether or not they would host retail dispensaries and on-site consumption lounges. The deadline for communities to opt out of sales was December 31st, 2021. However, those communities that opted out are not locked out of the opportunities the industry will deliver. They can always opt back in. Keep in mind, no city, town, nor village can opt out of legal cannabis. Cannabis is legal for those 21 years and over across the state. According to information provided by the localities to the OCM, just 10% of cities and 34% of all municipalities opted out of both retail dispensaries and on-site consumption lounges. However, I want to give this some perspective. More than 11 million New Yorkers live in cities. However, those localities that opted out have a collective population of about 118,000 residents. So it's clear that even with some localities choosing not to host sales, New Yorkers will have access to the adult use market. The MRTA centers the adult use cannabis market around delivering social and economic justice. The law sets the goal of working to undo the harms caused by disproportionate policing and mass incarceration of Black and Brown communities during the decades when cannabis was illegal. We call this period prohibition, and we know that it was devastating to our communities of color. For example, in 2020, the last full year before the MRTA was passed, 90% of those people arrested in New York City on marijuana charges were people of color. Since the passage of the MRTA, we've begun taking steps to right the wrongs of the past, and the number of arrests for cannabis have been dramatically reduced. We've also been expunging cannabis arrest records and convictions. This means erasing or removing cannabis arrests and convictions from an individual's criminal record. The state has already made great progress on expunging nearly 400,000 marijuana arrests and convictions. We're building an industry centered on equity. The MRTA sets a goal of delivering 50% of licenses in the adult use cannabis market to what it calls social and economic equity applicants. Under the law, social and economic equity applicants include minority and women-owned businesses, service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, and distressed farmers. It also includes individuals who come from the communities most impacted by over-policing during cannabis prohibition. Under the MRTA, priority is specifically given to those individuals who were arrested or convicted of cannabis charges and their immediate families. However, the MRTA doesn't stop there, and neither does our work. As I mentioned before, the MRTA also takes 40% of the revenue raised from taxes on cannabis sales and licensing fees, and we reinvest it back into impacted communities. These funds will flow in the form of grants. A cannabis advisory board will soon be appointed that will determine how these grants are reinvested into our impacted communities. These community investment grants will inject new opportunities across the state, in addition to the new businesses and jobs created by the industry. The OCM is building a cannabis ecosystem designed to ensure our equity entrepreneurs are successful for the long term. I started and ran a business myself. I know it's not easy to find the right location, let alone line up all of the resources necessary to bring your ideas to reality. However, successfully operating your business is actually the hardest part. We understand it's not just enough to provide licenses. We must provide the support and the resources necessary to help our entrepreneurs succeed. So we're creating a holistic system to support businesses and individuals through the entire process. We will start with the technical assistance for our new cannabis businesses, and will continue with business development supports as they grow. This system will provide a foundation for our businesses so that they can flourish and help create generational wealth. The governor took a big, I'm going to say a huge step forward in her State of the State with the announcement of the $200 million public-private fund that's going to provide capital funding to equity entrepreneurs. The OCM, following the MRTA's mandate, is also creating a technical assistance program for social and economic equity licensees to receive wraparound support and ongoing business assistance. The MRTA generally structures the adult use market across 2 tiers and provides for 9 license types, and you can see all of them here on the slide. It's designed to create a variety of ways to enter the cannabis market and to keep it competitive. We believe this structure will support a diversity of businesses, innovation, and opportunities for social and economic equity businesses. The Cannabis Control Board is responsible for approving regulations and application requirements. The regulations will further define what applicants need to apply. We expect the regulations to become available in the coming months. We're continuing to expand the medical cannabis program. The program started as part of the Department of Health after the Compassionate Care Act was enacted in 2014. Today, there are more than 120,000 New Yorkers participating in the medical cannabis program, and they're able to fill their prescriptions through New York State's 10 licensed providers, known as registered organizations. At our very first meeting of the Cannabis Control Board in October, we began implementing aspects of the medical program expansion, making it more accessible for patients. We're continuing that work, and on January 24th, the OCM launched a new patient certification and registration system and authorized practitioners to certify patients for any condition where they believe medical cannabis would be helpful. And if you look here on the slide, you can see some of the other actions we've taken since October. We are committed to supporting New York's CBD market and the control boards. And at the control board's November 3rd meeting, we formally adopted and finalized draft hemp regulations. In doing so, we officially launched the Cannabinoid hemp program in New York State. Through this program, we set clear guidelines for manufacturing, packaging, labeling, and testing of CBD products. All of our standards are grounded in the public health's best practices. With these standards, we're ensuring that New Yorkers know they're buying safe products and providing the industry with the tools it needs to compete in a fast-growing international CBD market. In December, the board released additional regulations, which you can see here on the slide. This includes creating a new CBD craft license and establishing a new license type for cannabinoid hemp farm processors. Excitingly, we are already accepting applications for CBD retail businesses. For CBD businesses. It doesn't matter if you're processing, distributing, selling topicals, tinctures, pills, food, beverages infused with CBD. You have to apply for a cannabinoid hemp retail license. So it's a $300 licensing fee, and you can apply through our website at cannabis.ny.gov. While the MRTA creates a structure for economic development, the law is grounded in a public health framework to help New Yorkers stay safe and healthy. Among the most important of our public health goals is protecting youth and their developing brains from the risks of cannabis use. The MRTA makes cannabis legal for adults 21 years old and over only. It requires that packaging and labeling be designed so that it does not appeal to children and teens. It also aims to keep both sales and advertising away from schools and religious institutions. The OCM will develop regulations that add further protections to keep New Yorkers safe, including those for quality assurance and testing. It's critical that the legal cannabis market provides safe, well-tested products. People have the right to know exactly what they're purchasing and that those products have been properly tested. We've seen the harm the unregulated products in the illicit market can cause, and part of legalizing cannabis is designed to reduce those harms. To that end, in the coming weeks, we will be launching our first public health campaign, where we will be telling New Yorkers about key aspects of the MRTA and strategies for keeping the public safe, including the risks of driving while impaired, protecting youth from cannabis, as well as safety reminders for adults to lock up their products and store them out of reach and away from children and pets. I'd like to take a moment and specifically comment on traffic safety. We, of course, know that New Yorkers are already consuming cannabis and have been for a long time. The MRTA takes new steps to help keep our roads safe. It is illegal to drive while impaired by cannabis. In fact, it's also illegal to use cannabis while driving, and it's illegal for your passengers to use it as well. If you drive high, you run the risk of hurting others and getting arrested under a charge that's similar to a DUI, and it's called driving while ability impaired by drugs. Under the MRTA, we will be investing in education programs and campaigns to make sure New Yorkers know that driving while impaired by cannabis is illegal and dangerous. Investments will also be made to increase the number of police officers trained as drug recognition experts. Drug recognition experts complete a rigorous training to use field testing techniques to tell if a driver is operating a vehicle while under the influence, to rule out medical conditions that may cause erratic driving, and to classify the category of substance an individual is impaired by. In addition to getting more safety officers on the road, the OCM will release reports on the impact of cannabis legalization on road safety, as well as studies on new devices to detect when someone is impaired by cannabis. Currently, there are no legal adult use sales in New York unless they are through one of our medical program dispensaries. We are building out the adult legal market, but it is not operational. We've read the same stories as you in the press about pop-up dispensaries claiming to be operating in a legal gray market. They often claim that they're providing a service or an item and may be offering cannabis as an associated free gift. They have even named this activity and they call it gifting. Nonetheless, I want to be clear with everyone here. This activity is illegal. There are no gray areas in the law. Worse, these operators are selling you a product that you may think has been tested and its quality assured. Nothing is further from the truth, and we hope that you will protect yourself from potential harm and not participate in these sales. The OCM is undertaking an education effort to make sure these operators know the law and will be providing updates. Now, we know everybody wants to know, when will there be adult use sales in New York State? We're working very hard to implement the MRTA, and while we want to get the market up and running as quickly as possible, it's critical we take the time necessary to get it right. That means we're making sure we're building a new industry that protects health and safety and delivers on our goals for equity and inclusivity. So we're examining our timeline closely. Our community outreach is underway with our Cannabis Conversations. We're also at work building partnerships that we need to properly support future entrepreneurs. At the same time, we're preparing the adult use regulations. We expect you'll start seeing regulations for adult use cannabis businesses late winter, early spring. These regulations will provide the first look at what applicants will need in order to apply. Once we release the regulations for adult use program, there will be a 60-day period for public comment. Then comments will be reviewed, the regulations amended as necessary, and thereafter we'll be in a position to begin accepting applications. So there are several steps to go from here to opening for sales. As we examine the timeline and determine how we can do this as quickly as possible, we're balancing the opening of the marketplace with our need for stability. For those of you interested in opening your own business, I urge you to take advantage of the business services currently being provided by local governments and development corporations. They can assist you with your business plans and help you get prepared to submit the strongest application possible. Unfortunately, decisions on application requirements have not yet been made. So remember, you will only get that information in the regulations when we release them later this year. So for the best, most reliable information you can get on this process, come straight to us and visit us at www.cannabis.ny.gov. So that site will allow you to stay connected with us. You can sign up for updates on the OCM website, and you can always catch us on Twitter at NYS_cannabis. Those are great ways to make sure you have the latest information as we roll out regulations in the coming months, followed by licensing opportunities. This is just the beginning. I look forward to speaking with you more as we build a safe, equitable cannabis industry that protects New Yorkers and delivers on our social and economic justice priorities. I'll now turn things back over to Aaron, who will help us with your questions.
Thanks, Tremaine. I just wanted to point out that we posted our upcoming schedule. You can always follow us on Twitter. We did have one change that the Spanish speaking event is going to be Tuesday, the 22nd. I know it says the 21st there. We're updating that now. And that this evening was one of 11 statewide community engagement sessions that we're calling Cannabis Conversations. Just please stay in touch with us. Also, please email us. We are still taking questions tonight, and we will get back to you if we don't get to your question tonight. For now, I'm going to start with some of the questions that we have gotten. The first question comes from Daniela. Daniela asks, can you own a retail license and a processor license?
So the MRTA is set up to prevent consolidation, and it's a system that we believe empowers small businesses. The way we've designed the cannabis industry in New York State is that we have 9 different license types in the adult use market, and we believe that that's going to give multiple points of entry for people who want to participate, while it's going to prohibit ownership of more than one license. So the short answer is no. You will not be able to hold a retail and a processor a license because we don't want consolidation in the market. We want to make sure that it remains open to small businesses.
Thanks, Tremaine. The next question I think we've gotten a couple of times. What is the cost associated with application and licensing fees?
So that has yet to be determined. We are working on it as we roll out the industry and develop our regulations. We're very aware that we have to be sensitive to costs for small entrepreneurs, for our social equity applicants, and we don't want to create barriers. So we're very aware of it, and we are operating with that concern in the front of our minds.
Great. The next one is a comment from Devin. I would like to raise the issue that when the OCM begins to process applications, there's one thing they need to keep in mind, that social equity applicants will not have access to resources that other individuals may have. This means that they don't have extra funds to pay someone thousands of dollars to complete business plans or applications. The applications will not all be written by someone with an MBA in business. Please process the applications by the thought and planning that went into the business and not so much sentence structure or grammar irregularities.
Devin, that is a very powerful statement. I'm glad that you have submitted it for us to consider today as part of this conversation, because that's a priority for us as well here at the OCM. We want to achieve the goal of delivering 50% of adult use licenses to equity applicants, and we want this to be an inclusive industry. We want to provide our new entrepreneurs with support and an understanding to make sure that understand that they make sure that they're playing on an equitable field. So we hear your comments. We will be operating in accordance with your statement. And again, I suggest and I ask people that think or believe that they might need additional support in developing their business plans and or applications to please seek some of the existing resources in your area. A lot of our local development corporations offer these services, but this is something that we are very much aware of, and grammatical errors or irregularities will not be the primary focus while we review applications.
Thank you. The next question comes from Kurt. How will cannabis cultivators be protected in a town or village that opted out of dispensaries consumption sites?
So I want to make sure everybody knows and understands that the opt-out is only for retail spaces and social consumption spaces. They do not have the opportunity, no locality has the ability to opt out of cannabis. Cannabis is legalized across the state. It is legal for those 21 years of old and over everywhere in New York State. And that means that although they may have opted out of hosting retail sales within a jurisdiction, cultivation centers, processing, and all auxiliary businesses associated with the cannabis industry are still allowed to operate within their boundaries.
Thank you. The next couple questions come from Priya. Priya sent in 4 questions. Where will the cannabis be coming from? Can you obtain cannabis from other legalized states?
Cannabis sold in New York State can only be grown in New York State. So all cannabis products in New York will come from cannabis grown in New York. We are not allowed to cross state lines with cannabis. This is going to be part of the first messaging campaign because it's really important for people to understand that that it being legal in New York does not mean that it's legal everywhere, nor that that it can move freely across state lines. And so we want people to really be protected. So we will be doing our part to make sure folks know and understand that this is a New York State law and we are not allowed to carry it across state lines.
Thank you for that. The next one from Priya is, will you adopt the Canadian model of prepackaged cannabis?
I definitely cannot say how closely our packaging requirements will mimic or resemble Canada's because we are currently working on packaging requirements. But I can safely say that our packaging requirements will be designed to ensure that New Yorkers are getting safe, tested products, and they will not be designed to to be attractive to children.
Great. The next one is, do you have to be a resident to own and operate a dispensary?
There are currently no residency requirements under the MRTA.
And then the last one from Priya, will there be a non-compete agreement for dispensaries not to be within a 5-mile radius to give dispensaries a fair chance?
So we're in the process of building this industry, and we are trying to design an ecosystem that actually stabilizes the market. So we will be considering factors such as proximity for dispensaries, but this is really about the overall stability of the industry. So that's what we're using as we move through this licensing process, and that's what will be the guiding force, stability in the market.
Great. The next question's from Brian, and we've gotten a couple like this too. What is the expected timeline for licenses to be released?
Mm, we're working on it, and we hope to get a better idea of the timeline when we release the regulations. We're working to have an adult use regulations out for public review late winter, early spring. But as I said, this timeline has a lot of moving parts. So while we are considering all of that, we are unable to say exactly when, but we are considering stability as the guiding force, as well as some other factors, but we will not have a real sense until we release the regulations.
Thank you. I know a lot of people are writing in about that. The next one comes from Lisa. With regards to equity, what are the opportunities for minority women in this industry?
Um, I hope that our messaging is clear, and I want to emphasize that there should be vast amounts of opportunities for minority and women in this industry. This is an industry that is being built and designed for New Yorkers. However, minority women fit under our social equity umbrella. They may be a minority women owned business, an MWBE. They might be a distressed farmer. They may come from an area that or community that has been harmed by cannabis prohibition, or they can be a disabled veteran. So in each of those cases, they would fall under the equity licensing group of applicants, and we need to make sure that we have opportunities for all people to participate in it. So while those are our social equity opportunities, and it does capture women and it captures people of color, we also know that there's an additional pot there that we're trying to make sure that all New Yorkers have access in this space. So we really do believe that there are vast opportunities and multiple ways for people to enter into this industry.
Great, thank you. The next question comes from Dylan. How many plants will the micro marijuana license allow? Will it be structured like Michigan's, having a cap on bud, but not veg, mothering, or root?
So we're in the process of working out the particulars. So I'm going to ask you to please be patient. That will be in our regulations. And we're going to ask you to make sure that you go to cannabis.ny.gov so that you can get updates and you'll know exactly when we release those regulations. The micro license is a really great opportunity to enter the market on a small scale. And so we want to make sure that people know what it allows and so they can plan their businesses accordingly. Unfortunately, as I said, we're still in the process of working it out. So please make sure to check in with us for the particulars.
Thank you. Next question is from Cindy. How are we handling things like being under the influence of marijuana and potentially endangering our children or public? What specifically comes to mind is transporting children on the school bus. What if there's an accident and a suspicion that the driver could be under the influence of marijuana or may have used the night before?
I think it's important for us to all remember that people have been using cannabis for a long time in New York State. And driving while impaired by cannabis is illegal. It's not only dangerous, it's illegal. So with the MRTA, we're adding education and resources to try to keep the roads safe. We're supporting law enforcement personnel. We're offering enhanced training. We're getting additional drug recognition experts to help them identify when someone's impaired by drugs and even what type of drugs they're impaired by. We're also going to be doing public education campaigns and working closely with the governor's traffic safety committee. We want to raise awareness about the risks of driving while impaired by cannabis. Cannabis impacts everyone differently. So it can take an effect in a short while or 4 hours. We don't know exactly how it is going to affect each person. So we need to have our drug recognition experts on the road. And that's why we're constantly reminding New Yorkers that this is not something that they should take for granted, that they need to drive safely and we don't want them risking their safety or those around them.
Thank you. Cindy has one more question. Can you give us some data on other states that have legalized for recreational purposes? Will we see the age of onset decrease, youth use increase?
Thanks, Cindy. I think that this is a real concern for particularly parents and teachers or educators. So the data looks differently from state to state because the rules are a little bit different. But if we look across the nation, we've actually seen adolescent use of illicit drugs or substances declining over the past few decades. But the most recent study was in 2021, which we know it might be actually the result of the pandemic. So I'm going to think about Colorado as one of the states to look at. In 2013, they did a study where they surveyed adolescents and they asked them if they'd used drugs or consumed cannabis within 30 days. The result was about 20% of the teens had consumed cannabis within 30 days before taking the survey. They ran the same survey back in 2019, and they found that about 20% of those youth that they had surveyed had again used cannabis or consumed cannabis within 30 days before the survey. So I'll say that keeping cannabis away from youth is one of our top priorities, and we have a mandate for robust data collection as well as producing an annual report describing the impacts of our legalization on youth. So we will be monitoring this closely, and it is at the forefront of our minds with regards to our policies and our education campaigns.
Great, thank you. The next question comes from Mitchell. May we please allow hemp shops to apply for a special license to sell Delta 8 products without being an actual dispensary if chain of title is kept on file?
Last fall, we launched the Cannabinoid Hemp program, and we specifically banned the sale of Delta 8 products by CBD stores. So the reason is simple. It is like THC, it's intoxicating. Its sales belong in the adult use market, in that regulated adult use market. So it is banned from sale by CBD stores, and it will not be going into the hemp program. It will remain as part of the adult use market.
Thank you. Mitchell then asked another question about the application fee, which I know you addressed before when Priya had asked about that. So I'm going to go to Scott. Scott said, I'm interested in the zoning of cannabis. How much control will local municipalities have in terms of zoning the various uses?
So localities generally have the ability to determine when, where, how businesses operate within a jurisdiction. They are not allowed to create burdensome local zoning laws to keep cannabis out of the community, though. If they wanted to opt out of sales, they have that opportunity. However, they cannot use zoning to unfairly burden cannabis businesses. That is not permitted.
Thank you. The next one comes from Robert. When will medical marijuana card holders be permitted to cultivate their own cannabis?
Wow. So this is one of the things which we took up last fall. We issued regulations. It was open for a public comment period that just ended on January 18th. We received about 160 comments from a wide variety of stakeholders throughout the state. We are reviewing those comments, and if changes are needed to the regulations, we will have to revise and then release them for an additional public comment period. All of that said, it could be a couple of months before they are complete, and medical marijuana card holders are actually permitted to cultivate their own cannabis.
Great. Next question comes from Leslie. Will there be a separation between alcohol consumption sites and marijuana consumption sites?
There most certainly will. The MRTA specifically prohibits the sale of cannabis and alcohol products at the same facility.
The next question comes from Matthew, building off the question Leslie just asked. I want to know more about what you can and can't provide at a consumption club. Can patrons bring their own drinks?
So the MRTA specifically prohibits the sale of cannabis and alcohol. Beyond that, we are working on the regulations to further define what can occur at on-site consumption lounges. We don't allow for them to sell alcohol and cannabis. So just as your question identifies, there is some space for us to flesh this out, and we hope to have a better answer, a more concise answer in the regulations.
Great, thank you. The next question comes from Blair. How will you bridge the gap, increase empathy and understanding between medical and recreational users? In other words, how will you ensure that the tone, leadership, and direction of this initiative is inclusive, positive, and truly representative of its value across the spectrum of users?
So I hope the work that we have embarked upon already speaks to that, and that it clearly demonstrates our understanding and support for the medical program. We really want to make sure that people understand that cannabis is a multidimensional plant, and that it has medicinal as well as recreation uses. This is not something that we are unfamiliar with. We see it with plants across the board, something as simple as mint and ginger. We really have to begin with education. We're going to be undertaking a series of public education programs to help the public better understand all the aspects of cannabis. And at the same time, we will remain committed to supporting the medical cannabis program because we want it to remain stable. We want it to be a source and a beneficial source for people for information and exposure for people in New York State.
Great, thank you. Next question's from Jill. What actions are being taken to advance federal decriminalization and rescheduling?
Well, as a state entity, we're really focused on creating the New York State cannabis industry. And we want to make sure that we're protecting the public health, delivering on economic and social justice goals. However, our partners at the federal level have taken up the work of legalization as well as trying to solve some of the problems of operating cannabis businesses more generally. So we are supportive of their efforts. We work in collaboration with them. And however, we must rely on their leadership on these issues.
Thank you. Next question is from Dan. Will there be delivery drivers for cannabis like Uber that people can order through an app like Canada does?
So the details of how the delivery system will work or what parameters we will be putting in place to limit how it operates have yet to be determined. But I am going to say New York State is full of innovative, creative people. So we know that we do not have to wait for some of the larger companies like you've identified in your question to come up with a solution. We have New Yorkers that can figure out what it should look like in their communities and work towards that goal.
Great. Next question is from Karen. What will security requirements be at points of sale?
That will be more clearly defined in our regulations as we write them. And I hope that you will check in on them and give us some comments regarding it. However, we're going to be placing requirements around the way business operates in New York State so that we can protect the people, the products, the facilities, and the customers. We are very aware of the safety concerns that exist, and we want to make sure that not only are we equitable and inviting and that there's social and economic justice, but that it's actually a safe industry for people to participate in.
Thank you. Just two more questions. This one comes from Michael. He wants to know what steps have you taken to ensure that the legacy market folks will be included in the award of licenses?
So I'm sorry, I'm just going to ask you to repeat. What steps we've taken to ensure that the equity applicants, is that what he said?
That the legacy market folks, yeah.
So legacy market, that's a little different from equity. So we don't have a mandate for legacy market. What we do have a mandate regarding our social equity applicants. And so we are trying to make sure that we move, that is the priority. With regards to legacy operators, we're hoping that the education that we're doing, the supports that we're putting in place will help people to transition from the unregulated market into the regulated market. So some of that it will be done through our social equity office, our Office of Social Equity. Some of it are the supports that we're putting in place and partnerships that we're developing with existing providers. And it's also us developing a regulatory scheme that does not create burdensome hurdles for people to apply for licensing and to operate.
Thank you. And the last question, I think you answered before, but I'm going to ask it, and if you have anything to add. Adam wants to know if you are able to obtain a cannabis grower's license or a micro business license, would you still be able to grow cannabis in a municipality that has opted out of the sale of cannabis?
So, yes, you may grow in every municipality in our state. Um, Opting out of retail sales and consumption sites is just that. It only affects retail sales and on-site consumption. You may still operate cultivation businesses. You just have to abide by the regular, whatever normal zoning laws exist for industry in that space.
Thank you, Tremaine, for answering the numerous questions that we received tonight. I think we got a lot of good ones and even just some good comments. If we didn't answer your question, we will definitely be getting back to you if you send in a question to cannabisconversations@ocm.ny.gov if it wasn't answered in the slides or the presentation. I hope everybody enjoyed tonight. I know that we did, even though we didn't get to meet face to face. Just getting to do these have been great. Tremaine, do you have anything else to add?
I just want to say thank you to everyone that's shown up this evening. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to share our vision with everyone else. And even if your question is it pops up later on, please send it to us. We really want to hear from everyone so that we can have a thoughtful process while we're developing our regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.